Thank you, Carl. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce our supervisor in the 3rd District of Orange County, a gold sponsor of tonight's event, the Honorable Todd Spitzer.
Well, before I introduce one of our honored guests tonight, I want to take a moment to thank our chairman, Fred Whitaker. You know how much work he has to do, and Julian and the staff, all the sacrifices he makes. You know he runs a law firm, he's a city councilman, he runs our party, he's an incredible father. His wife Mignon's here, their 3 children, Jane, Ann, and Jack. Please give a big round of applause to our great chairman, Fred Whitaker. Thank you, Fred. So I hope you heard what Fred said in his opening comments. Here we are, Orange County. We're an oasis around an entire state of liberalism. The whole state, right? No statewide constitutional officers. And if we're going to protect our party and we're going to protect our state and the nation, we have to be consistently conservative. And yet, Scott Baugh, when he was chairman of our party, what did he tell us? Don't take union money. And there are still folks who continue to take union money. And there are still folks who endorse Democrats over Republicans after our party endorses Republicans. When I was the whip in the California legislature, the reason we maintained a voice in Sacramento is we had party discipline. And that's the message tonight. It's about sticking together, having discipline, not compromising, not being pushed in the wrong direction. And so the reason I'm so proud to introduce the great Attorney General of the state of Nevada, Adam Laxalt, is because he is a fine example of a national leader who is saying hell no to the liberalism and the social agenda to be soft on crime. Crime in our county is up 20%. And Kamala Harris, as the Attorney General of the state of California, led the charge to make our state soft on crime. We had great Republican attorney generals when in our heyday who stood up for us. George Deukmejian and Dan Lundgren. Those were the kinds of people who we elected from the Republican Party, very similar to what our great Attorney General Adam Laxalt is doing for the state of Nevada. At 38 years old, he is the youngest Attorney General in the entire country. When you hear him tonight, you're going to know Adam Laxalt is the future public safety champion of the nation, as certainly serving currently as Attorney General. He earned his way to the podium tonight. His great-grandfather, or his grandfather, Senator Paul Laxalt, was a dear, dear friend with our great Republican president, Ronald Reagan, and you're going to be so joyed to hear some incredible stories about him. Adam Laxalt has shown the value of what an ethical prosecutor must be. Of course, as I said, we've revered our attorney generals, George Deukmejian and Dan Lundgren, but what did they have in common? Just like Adam Laxalt, they were always ethical and responsible in the pursuit of justice. They protected the rights of victims. They did not cheat to get convictions. They did not practice lazy law, which results in serious cases being compromised. And then, of course, the person who was an example of not having that was Kamala Harris. And what did the people of the state of California do? They elected her to the United States Senate. So I'm proud of Mr. Laxalt's efforts in the state of Nevada. He fought in his state to tighten regulations on convicted sex offenders to protect the public from loopholes favoring those offenders. He drafted laws to make sure that those sex offenders, after their conviction, were given certain lifetime conditions in front of the parole board. And he has fought consistently for veterans' rights. He was a JAG officer, and then he went on to teach in the Navy. Because of his continuing commitment to protect the public, to advocate for veterans, to protect our God-given constitutional rights, it is my honor to introduce our first speaker tonight. Please welcome the Attorney General of the state of Nevada, the Honorable Adam Laxalt.
Well, good evening, everybody. I want to start by going back to 1976. In 1976, your former governor, Ronald Reagan, decided that he was going to take a big leap, and he was going to run for President of the United States against a sitting Republican president. Why do I bring this up? Because he asked my grandfather, who had been in the United States Senate for 2 years and was a very young member, if he would be his general chairman for Ronald Reagan for president. Now you can imagine this was pretty risky. In fact, my grandfather described going onto the Senate floor after this was announced as being an absolute leper. No one would go near the entire quadrant of the Senate floor because obviously you don't really want to go against the president of either party. But he said at the time that Ronald Reagan was the right guy. He had known him for a very long time. They had served together as governors. And he knew he stood up for the values of our country. He knew that he stood up for our values, that we needed to remove power from Washington, and we needed to try to figure some way to get power back to the states and power back to the people. So they went on in 1976 to come from nowhere, and some of you were at that convention, I'm sure. Anybody there? And they lost by less than 100 votes. Ronald Reagan would have been nominated that year in 1976. But what happened, as many historians have chronicled, they actually won the people at that convention. And they won the people across the country. And fortunately, Reagan decided that he'd rerun. And we all know how that story turned out. My grandfather had the great honor to be able to be his general chairman in 76, 80, and 84. And he was able to introduce him each time as he was being nominated in 1980 and 1984. And there's a great story. Things are crazy, a lot of stuff going on. And one of the reporters, the then young Tom Brokaw, said, "Senator, where's your speech? We need your speech." And he pulls out of his pocket a napkin. Says, "I've been a little busy." And Brokaw says, "Dear God." But my grandfather got up there and gave that speech in front of 50, 60 million people across our country, across the world, right from his heart. He had spoken these values from 76 on. He represented them in our great state and across the country with Ronald Reagan. And they're values that won our party and won our country. And I think a lot of us saw with the age of Obama, those values slip away very, very rapidly. Fortunately, AGs, for those of you that followed, certainly not your Attorney General here in California, but AGs decided they were going to fight for the rule of law. They were going to fight for our constitutional system. And they called us the last line of defense. Why? Because whether it was executive amnesty, whether it was the Clean Power Plan, Waters of the United States, our Second Amendment, these all came out of the AG community. Very bright lawyers that came up with great lawsuits to try to slow down the most extreme centralization of power we've ever seen in our country. Of course, the media never covered it. We just all lived it. But I heard it in every corner of my state, and I know you guys feel it even worse here in California. So what's the most offensive thing in the last 8 years? Well, there were a lot. But one of the most offensive things was the stat that I always heard. 5 of the top 10 richest counties in America were where? Washington, D.C. suburbs. Everyone else is struggling. My state, trying to break out of a very severe recession. And who's getting rich? Washington, government, and all the people that got a chance to be able to peddle that power. Well, fortunately, this 2016 election, we saw that great clash again that we saw in 1980. People were fed up. Plenty of Democrats were fed up, certainly in my state. People were done with it. They knew too much had gone to Washington. We had lost too much power. and it was a great year for America and a great election. But does anyone think that's enough? What have we seen since? The resistance. We've seen a basic refusal to accept our democratic process. That's something that's incredibly dangerous for our country and our republic, in my opinion. But what does it mean for us? It means we need to dig in. We got to fight harder. And I think that Republicans tend to be too polite. Everybody agree with that? And I think our elected officials sometimes tend to be too polite. So it's time for us to dig in. It's time for people in this room. I think someone said it earlier. You guys are an oasis of liberty in an occupied state. How about that? But this is a very big room with a lot of people that can be active. They can contribute. They can join the fight. You guys have your own local races to fight for. But one unique thing about Orange County is you guys fight for people across the country as well. As you pick leaders, the Tom Cottons of the world, my Iraq, Afghanistan generation, and others that you adopt, this matters. And I'm a firm believer. We don't need majorities in the U.S. Senate. We don't need majorities in these places. We need a strong, bright, capable handful of leaders that are willing to make these arguments and fight that good fight. So I ask you to do that. Keep committed to that. God bless you all. Have a great night.